The bank lobby was no longer a place for routine transactions. It had become an arena. Danielle stood alone at the counter, her request met with suspicion, while every pair of eyes in the room turned toward her. The murmur of customers swelled into a storm, phones lit like lanterns, and authority pressed down on her with relentless weight. Every second tightened the cord of tension, every glance a silent trial. And as the moment burned hotter, one could only wonder, will justice open its door or close it forever? Everyone thought it was over, but the truth behind it was even more unbelievable. If you find this story worth pondering, please comment with just one word: justice. And remember to like, plus follow. The marble lobby breathed a tempered hush as Danielle Harris stepped in from Michigan Avenue, where a mild autumn breeze chased leaves along the curb and taxis idled in a loose line. Behind the glass doors, the branch felt like a small cathedral to money. High ceiling ribbed with quiet lights, stone columns, a polished floor that held reflections as steady as a lake. It was lunch hour in downtown Chicago, and the room carried the ordinary music of the day polite greetings. The low murmur of tellers, the soft click of heels, yet the rhythm tightened when Danielle joined the queue with a leather folio tucked beneath her arm and a paper cup of black coffee in the other hand. At 12:30 in the afternoon, the line moved forward. She had the look of someone used to a schedule: dark blazer, simple gold studs, hair pinned neatly away from her face. The folio was worn at the edges the way good tools wear. She kept a thumb against its spine as if it anchored her in the current of small motions around her. When it became her turn, she stepped to Brian Collins' window and offered a measured smile that asked nothing more than courtesy. "Good afternoon," she said. "I'd like to make a cash withdrawal." Brian's gaze skimmed her face and jacket before he settled on the slip she laid on the counter. "How much are we talking about?" $25,000, she answered, each word calm and exact, as if naming the amount were no more dramatic than ordering lunch. The words hung in the air for a breath. Somewhere behind them, a printer whirred, and a child let out a brief squeal that the parent immediately hushed. Brian did not type. He glanced toward the lobby as if to confirm there were witnesses, then back to Danielle, his mouth lifting at one corner in a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Identification," he said, a single word set down like a rulebook. She placed her driver's license on the tray, followed by a bank card embossed with the familiar logo. "My account number is printed here. You can verify the balance." Brian took the card by its edges with exaggerated care and turned it under the light. "People can be very creative," he said to the air between them. "We see all sorts of things before lunch." He tapped the glass with the card as if checking its weight. Danielle did not answer. She let the silence do the work of asking whether he intended to serve her. The customers behind her watched openly now. At an adjacent window, a teller greeted a gray-haired couple with the ease of neighbors. A man in a navy suit checked his watch and then his phone. Someone near the door raised the camera just high enough to capture the interaction, the tiny red light winking to life like a pilot flame. "Do you have proof of employment?" Brian asked, voice low, almost patient. "And a statement of intended use for the funds." "I have provided standard identification. I am withdrawing from my own account," she said, keeping her tone even. "If you open the profile, you will see years of activity at this branch." He did not look at his screen. Large cash withdrawals require extra caution. It is for everyone's safety. He leaned back just enough to suggest leisure. "You can appreciate that." Danielle set the coffee down, lid facing away from the counter as if to spare the surface any rings. "I appreciate consistent procedure," she said. "Consistency is a fine safety measure." A woman in a wool coat whispered to her companion, and the whisper traveled like a draft. A young man in a puffer jacket folded his arms and shifted his weight to one foot. At the end of the line, a freelance reporter named Emily Parker recognized tension the way a sailor recognizes weather. She drew her phone from her bag, opened a streaming app, and framed the scene without commentary. The picture stayed on Danielle's profile, on the card in Brian's hand, on the pause that followed each exchange. Brian returned the license without returning the card. "I will need to speak to my supervisor," he said, and vanished to the side with the unhurried gait of someone certain that time belonged to him. Danielle's eyes followed him only as far as the glass edge. Then she sipped the coffee and breathed once, slowly, the way a runner resets before the next lap. When he came back, he brought with him a woman with a clipped step and a badge that read Linda Morales. Linda wore the brittle expression of a person trained to manage problems by declaring them problems. "Ma'am," she began, "for transactions of this size, we will need to verify employment, income source, and the reason for the withdrawal. Do you have documentation to support that?" Danielle offered the same answer. "I am withdrawing from my own account. The profile will confirm identity and balance. If there is a written policy that requires the materials you listed for this amount, please show it to me." Linda looked past Danielle to the people watching. "Policies exist," she said, "whether or not they are printed on the wall." Emily shifted to capture Linda's face and the faces behind her. In the stream's chat, comments mounted little strings of ordinary words that looked like a crowd made of letters. The volume in the lobby took on a different quality, not louder, but sharper, like air before a storm. A security guard named Marcus Johnson drifted a few steps closer, not intrusive, hands folded at his belt, eyes moving between Danielle and the counter. He had the careful manner of a man who had learned to resolve trouble by reading it early. "Ma'am," Linda said. "Crisp now. Please step aside to the waiting area while we process the additional verifications. It may take a while." Danielle did not step away. "I'm happy to wait here while you open my account and confirm that identification and balance match," she said. "Nothing more is necessary for lawful withdrawal." Brian's smile thinned. "There is also the matter of cash on hand," he added. "We may not have that much available. You can order it from the safe," Danielle replied. "Or from the back room. I am not in a hurry." "You will be surprised how often people are in a hurry when they reach this point," Brian said. He slid the card across the tray, then stopped it with his fingertip. "Until we are satisfied, we cannot proceed." The moment lasted long enough for the lobby to feel the weight of it. Danielle rested the folio on the counter. A simple object, dark leather, the sort that belongs in boardrooms and airports, and still looks at home in either. She did not open it. A pale shaft of autumn light from the glass doors found the corner of its cover and laid a small coin of brightness there. "Let us be clear," she said, her voice pitched for the room rather than the two people across the glass. "If your policy treats me differently from the customers to my left and right, then the issue is not procedure." Linda folded her arms. "This is not about you personally. It is about risk." "Then please apply your risk policy consistently," Danielle answered. An older man in a tweed cap nodded once, as if agreeing with the sermon. A woman with a stroller adjusted the baby's blanket and took half a step away from the line, angling for a better view. Emily's stream count ticked upward as quietly as snowfall. Brian touched the keyboard at last, reluctantly, as if doing so gave ground. He typed with 2 fingers and frowned at the screen, though whether he read anything was not clear. "We will need additional identification," he said again, more loudly, as if volume could turn repetition into reason. "Among other things." "What other things?" Danielle asked. "Supervisory approval," he said. "External verification. Documentation we will determine." Danielle measured her breath and kept her shoulders level. She had held herself that way in rooms far less polite than this one, in rooms where politeness was a glaze poured over something harder. The folio under her hand felt cool, steady. The counter's glass was clean enough to show a blurred version of her face, and in that blur, she could see the line she had set for herself. Courtesy, then clarity, then insistence. Brian slid the slip back toward her without stamping it. "This amount is too large for you to withdraw," he said, crisp and final, as if pronouncing a verdict the building would enforce. Danielle lifted her eyes to his and let the stillness do what argument could not. The lobby seemed to lean in by a fraction. All those small lives pausing on the brink of the next errand, the next sandwich, the next email, waiting for whatever would happen after this. Danielle's gaze did not waver as if she were hiding something. Phones rose around the lobby, like small lanterns as the hush from a moment before stretched into something sharper, and the pause that had gathered behind Danielle's last sentence turned into attention. The leather folio still rested on the counter, a quiet line between her and the window, while the teller's glass reflected a faint, trembling map of faces behind her. What had begun as an errand was no longer an errand. The room seemed to understand that, the way a congregation understands when a sermon has left the printed page and entered the heart. Outside, the Michigan Avenue light was bright enough to throw slow-moving shapes across the marble floor. It was lunch hour, the hour of salads in paper bowls and cups balanced on cardboard trays, the hour when office workers judged lines with the same care they judge budgets. Inside, the band kept its own manners. Softened voices, shoes that announced themselves politely, a scent of floor polish and wool. The wall clock ticked toward 1:45 in the afternoon. To a listener, the sound will feel familiar, like the click of a turn signal before a lane change. Danielle Harris did not crowd the counter or lean into the microphone slot. She stood in the open posture of someone who has learned to let the facts speak, chin level, breath steady. Brian Collins, on the other side of the glass, wore the new confidence of a man who believes the room agrees with him. He held the bank card between 2 fingers as if it were a prop, not a key. When he glanced back over his shoulder, he was not checking a supervisor, he was checking an audience. A woman with a press pass tucked behind a phone case stepped closer to the velvet rope. Emily Parker had the practice of someone who had covered more than a few city meetings and community hearings. She spoke softly, not to Danielle but to the lens. "People need to see this," she said, barely above a breath, and her thumb began the live stream. No banner, no dramatics, only a simple caption with a branch location and the time words spelled out rather than shorthand, so that any viewer would understand where they were and when. The camera did not chase faces. It lingered on gestures. The way Brian turned the card against the light, the way Danielle's hand returned to rest atop the folio as if setting a bookmark, the way a gray-haired couple at a nearby window exchanged a glance of long marriage. A man in a navy suit angled his body to watch without losing his own place in line. A young woman with earbuds pulled one butt free, because hearing matters as much as seeing when an ordinary moment begins to tilt. Another set of heels entered the scene. The measured cadence of authority. Linda Morales arrived with a clipboard and the cool manner of someone accustomed to being the last word. If the bank had a tone, she spoke it. For the transaction you have requested, she said, not unkindly but without softness, we will need to verify employment, source of income, and a statement of intended use for the funds. Danielle gave the same answer she had given before, worded with care, voice pitched not to challenge but to clarify. I have presented government identification and the bank card associated with my account. My profile will confirm identity and balance. She paused. If there is a written policy requiring the materials you list for this amount, please provide it. Linda's eyes moved from Danielle to the circle of phones, then back. Policies exist whether or not they are posted in the lobby, she said. And the sentence was built to sound definitive, like a door that closes quietly but locks. Consistency is the policy most customers trust, Danielle replied. Not a performance, only a statement, offered in the same tone a teacher uses when reminding a class of the rules everyone already knows. Brian set the card down, not returning it, and raised his voice by a notch that invited witnesses. We have to be careful, he said. Large cash withdrawals present risk. You would be surprised what people try before lunch. There was no anger on Danielle's face, only the fatigue that follows too much patience. Please open the account screen, she said, and you will see years of ordinary activity at this branch. At that, Emily let the mic pick up the ambient sound of the room, the cough of someone who wished to be invisible, the stroller wheel's small squeak, the rustle of the clipboard as Linda adjusted the forms. In the corner of the screen, a viewer count rose from a handful to dozens, then into the low hundreds. Not a surge so much as a steady climb. Comments appeared in complete words because older watchers tend to write that way. Questions about policy, notes of concern, a memory here and there about a time when a teller had known a customer by name. Marcus Johnson, the security guard, drifted close enough to be part of the conversation without becoming the conversation. He kept his hands folded, shoulders relaxed, eyes honest. There was nothing theatrical in his presence. It felt like the presence of crossing guard outside the school, someone who stands where a line might be crossed, so that it will not be. Ma'am, Linda said, the syllables clipped. Please step to the seating area. We will process the additional verifications. It may take some time. Danielle did not move. I will remain here while you do what is necessary to honor a lawful withdrawal from my account, she said. And then, as if to make space for grace, she added, I can wait. At the rear of the line, a woman in a wool coat leaned toward her companion. They have to check, she whispered. It is a lot of money. Her companion nodded, not unkindly, the way people nod when trying to make sense of a situation by trusting authority. 2 steps away, a pair of young professionals exchanged a look of steady irritation. If she has identification, what else do they need? One said under his breath. The young woman with a single earbud offered, not to anyone in particular. It does not look the same at the other windows. Emily's camera found the rhythm of those reactions without exploiting them. She let the frame breathe, then returned to Danielle's face. The comments climbed again. A retired teacher wrote that she had withdrawn a similar amount for a down payment without being asked for anything beyond identification. A man who described himself as a small business owner wrote that he had brought cash orders without questions as long as he wore a tie. A handful of watchers urged patience. A handful urged that someone call the press. The phrase, "this feels wrong," appeared more than once, spelled out in full. Brian typed at last, but he kept his posture theatrical, as if the act of typing were a favor. Even if we proceed, he said, eyes still on the screen, there is the matter of cash availability. He tapped a key. We may not be able to accommodate that amount today. I am not asking for something unusual, Danielle answered. If the branch cannot provide the full amount immediately, you can release what is on hand and arrange for the remainder. You have my account history. You have my identification. The process is not complicated. Complexity is in the eye of the beholder, Brian said, and the smile he gave the glass made the words sound like wit. Linda slid a form across the tray and touched the top line with her pen. List your employer here, she instructed. Then your supervisor. Then your contact at Human Resources. We will also need a brief note explaining your intended use of funds and the projection of future withdrawals over the next quarter. Woman sing I. Emily let the mic catch that list like a bell toll. The comments shifted. That is not standard, someone wrote. Ask them to show where it is written. Another offered. A third comment, longer, pointed out that requiring purpose statements for cash withdrawals carries a history that is not neutral. The count in the corner moved past a few hundred and into more. For every watcher who typed, a dozen watched without typing. Marcus cleared his throat softly, the way a person clears a path when he has to. Miss Morales, he said, careful with titles, careful with tone. Maybe we could let the customer remain at the window while the account is reviewed. It might be faster for everyone. Linda did not turn. Thank you, she said to the air. We have a process. Danielle regarded Marcus with a small nod that spoke gratitude without making a scene of it. Her attention returned to the counter. If there are irregularities on my account, you can name them, she said. If there are not, you can proceed. Brian frowned at his monitor again and did not answer. Sometimes silence is a decision dressed as a pause. The young professionals near the rope had stopped pretending they were not following each sentence. This is the kind of thing my aunt talked about, one said, not loudly. Rules that bend, but only one way. The older couple seemed torn between the comfort of trusting the people behind the glass and the discomfort of what they were watching. Both feelings were real. Both belonged to the room. Emily did not narrate. She let the bank narrate itself. The stream witnessed the way a snowfall gathers edges, and somewhere beyond the walls of the branch, notifications reached desks and kitchen tables and corner diners where the afternoon coffee was being poured. It was not a tidal wave. It was a rising river. Linda tapped the clipboard, a sound like a gavel in miniature. Ma'am, this is our last request, she said, though everyone knew requests can multiply. Please be seated while we initiate additional verifications. Danielle's answer did not rise. I will stay here, she said. I do not consent to extra requirements that are not written and not applied to everyone. There it was, the line itself, set down calmly. The phones drew a fraction closer, as phones do when words strike a narrow target. Emily did not need to suggest a caption. The caption wrote itself in the comments, in sentences that read like neighbors speaking to neighbors. This looks like unequal treatment. Policies should be consistent. Stay steady. A man in a fleece vest muttered that it would all go faster if people cooperated. The young woman with the earbud turned, face composed, and said, she is cooperating. The room absorbed the exchange without argument. It felt like a corner of a city bus when strangers decided to behave like a neighborhood. The bank, too, had a neighborhood, and in that neighborhood the roles were becoming clear. Danielle's calm had a way of throwing other tones into contrast. Brian's smile had sharpened. Linda's certainty had hardened. Marcus' presence had widened, not in physical size but in moral shape. Emily's steady hand had become a vessel for the eyes outside. The count in the corner of the stream nudged past 1,000. The chat read like a chorus, not in one voice but in many. A retired nurse wrote that her bank had never asked for her supervisor. A grandfather wrote that he hoped his grandchildren were watching because they needed to learn what dignity looked like in real time. Someone typed the word press and someone else typed the word policy, and both words began to repeat in different hands. Linda set down her pen. Ma'am, she said, if you do not comply with the verification process, we will not complete the transaction. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Danielle rested her palm on the folio to keep the hand from balling into a fist because this was not a place for fists. You have what you need to proceed, she said. If you choose not to, that choice will be visible. Brian exhaled through his nose, a sound that was almost a laugh. Everything is visible these days, he said. The lobby changed the temperature without changing the thermostat. That is how rooms behave when truth is named. Emily's camera trembled once as her hand adjusted, then settled again. Marcus shifted his weight and squared his shoulders, a small pledge made with posture. From the comments, the words grew simpler, stronger. This is wrong. Treat her the same as everyone. Call the newsroom. The count rose again, and even the people who had not intended to stay past their own business seemed unable to leave. The branch had become a stage, and without anyone planning it, the city had taken a seat. Linda opened her mouth to repeat the instruction that had already been refused. Before she could, something changed at the edge of the scene. The doors made their quiet whoosh, the way well-oiled doors do, and the lobby answered with a shift of attention that needed no director. A figure paused by the threshold, assessing not the line but the center of gravity in the room. In that beat, every phone lens leaned an invisible hair toward the entrance, as if drawn by the same thread. A deep male voice carried from the doorway, as steady as a judge reading a calendar. What is happening here? It was the regional manager, Richard Chen. Richard Chen stepped in with the kind of quiet that carries rank, pausing just inside the doors long enough to take the measure of the room, then crossing the marble in an unbroken line toward the window where Danielle stood. He was not hurried. Authority rarely islanded. His suit jacket felt clean at the shoulder, his tie kept a disciplined knot, and his eyes moved like a man counting exits. The lobby's soft conversations thinned to a careful murmur. Emily's phone shifted to hold him in frame, and the viewers beyond the glass door of the internet learned his name as if being introduced at a town meeting. He stopped beside Linda Morales and Brian Collins and let his gaze travel over Danielle's face, the identification on the tray, the bank card, the leather folio. He did not offer a handshake. He offered a procedure. In a voice meant to sound like reassurance but built for command, he explained that the institution took large cash withdrawals seriously, that safeguards were in place to protect the bank and its customers, that in unusual circumstances additional steps were required, and that this, unfortunately, was such a circumstance. The words landed with the gravity of policy and the convenience of opinion. Danielle kept her posture open, a stillness shaped by practice. I have presented government identification and my bank card, she said in a tone light enough to carry and steady enough to stay. My account history is long and ordinary. Please open the profile and proceed. Richard did not reach for the keyboard. He inclined his head as if acknowledging a point made by a student in a seminar, and then announced the requirements that would follow if the withdrawal were to continue. Recent tax returns, employment verification, primary sources of income with contact information, and a written statement describing the purpose of the funds. He added that, for transactions of this magnitude, a supervisor had the right to ask for a projection of future withdrawals over the next quarter. Each item on the list sounded like a brick he laid between Danielle and the cash drawer. The lobby breathed the way a room breathes when something delicate is at stake. A few customers adjusted the distance between their feet the way people do when they plan to stand longer than expected. An older gentleman cleared his throat with the dignity of someone who has spent decades making himself small in public spaces. A young woman with a single earbud glanced at the wall clock, which had climbed to 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and then looked back at Danielle as if willing her to hold the line. Emily let the microphone collect the ambient sound, a printer starting, the greedy click of a pen top, the slow creak of the glass door as someone left to make room for someone else to stay and watch. On the stream, the viewer counted written in words because she knows older eyes do not love shorthand ticked, past a few hundred and into the thousands, and the comments began to settle into the clear rhythm of neighbors speaking in full sentences. Some asked whether such documentation was customary. Some offered stories from their own withdrawals, a down payment, a small business deposit, a granddaughter's college tuition. A retired postal worker wrote that he had never been asked for anything more than identification in 30 years of banking, and the year spelled out looked like a ledger of trust. Linda added her voice to Richard's as if harmony might make the chorus true. We regret the inconvenience, she said, with a formality usually reserved for scripted apologies, but exceptions require exceptional care. Danielle did not raise her volume. I am requesting a lawful withdrawal from my account, she said. If the policy you describe is written, please show it to me. If it is not written and not universally applied, then it is not policy. Brian's smile showed doubt. He turned the card under the light again, as if the light could erase the embossing. Our system flags certain patterns, he said, eyes on the screen as though reading. We are obligated to investigate. Name the pattern, Danielle answered. If there is an irregularity, put it into words. If there is not, release my funds. Marcus Johnson, who had spent a career trying to keep rooms from breaking, stepped a little nearer to stand within earshot without placing himself between anyone. He spoke to Richard the way a man speaks to a man he respects enough to risk disagreeing with. Sir, he said, even and respectful. We might save time by reviewing the account at the window and proceeding with the portion we can fulfill today. The customer is calm. The lobby is watching. Richard acknowledged him with a slight turn of the head and the noncommittal courtesy of corporate habit. Thank you, he said, and put the thank you in the same place managers put the phrase, I have heard you but will not change course. The pressure in the lobby increased without anyone stepping forward. Pressure is often like that. It moves in the chest first. The gray-haired couple who had earlier nodded along with the talk of caution now exchanged a different kind of look. A small apology carried between two people who have learned to regret quietly. A man in a fleece vest tucked his zipper halfway up and said something about cooperation that sounded like advice but felt like surrender. The young professionals by the rope stopped pretending to check their email. Emily kept the frame steady and let the story write itself in the space between sentences. The comments multiplied. The phrase, banking while black, appeared without the mark that turns words into slogans. And because it was spelled out that way, each word landed as a separate truth. A retired teacher wrote a paragraph about fairness that could have been read into the congressional record. Someone said they were calling a newsroom. Someone else said they already had. A third voice said to remain patient and document everything. Richard returned to his list. We will need your employer's name, he said, your supervisor's name, the main line for your human resources department, and a direct contact if available. Please also provide a brief written explanation of your intended use of funds, including the amount to be dispersed and the timeline for that disbursement. If you have this see over, is there a threshold at which you require this of every customer? Danielle asked. And may I see it in writing? Our policies are adaptive, Linda replied, which was a careful way of saying elastic. All the more reason to write them down, Danielle said, and in the sentence there was iron that did not need to clank. Brian tapped a key as if typing might sound like compliance. Ma'am, we are trying to protect you, he said. People attempt things before lunch that you would not believe. Oh yeah, believe me, Danielle answered, almost gently. I am familiar with what people attempt before lunch. There was no laughter. The line did not loosen. The bank's air had the taste of a room just before thunder. Marcus took one half step closer to Daniel's side of the window. The way one steps a half step closer to the friend who tells the truth in a room that punishes truth. Emily's stream scrolls steadily now. Church, deacons, nurses, veterans, grandmothers, small business owners, all the citizens a city becomes when no one is trying to sell them any writing sentences that sounded like testimony. A reporter from a local paper asked for permission to use the footage, and Emily posted a simple reply in full words that said the video was public and that accuracy mattered. The phrase policy applies to everyone appeared often enough to feel like a refrain. In places where shorthand would have been faster, the watchers wrote out every letter. Richard considered the line of phones and then spoke to Danielle with a formality that wished to be graceful. We must be consistent in our caution, he said. The bank takes identity theft seriously. We have seen sophisticated schemes, and if we err, it will be on the side of security. If you can provide the requested documents, we will move forward. If not, we will have to decline the transaction for today. Consistency, Danielle repeated, is exactly what I am asking for. He did not answer that. He looked at Linda, and Linda looked at Brian, and the three faces arrayed behind the glass made a single expression that rooms recognized as a door closing. A woman near the rope, who had been quiet until now, spoke in a voice meant to be heard. I withdrew a similar amount last spring to pay a contractor, she said. No one asked me for anything beyond identification. She stopped there. The sentence did not accuse, but it aligned itself with the truth and waited. The older gentleman in the tweed cap bowed his head as if the sentence were a prayer. Emily let the silence after that sentence be a little longer than usual. In that space, the stream's comments filled with lines that were not angry so much as clear. Apply the same rules to everyone. Ask to see the policy. Do not step aside. She read them without reading them aloud. A good witness knows when to stay out of a story's way. Richard set his palm on the counter in a gesture that looked like a conclusion. Ma'am, he said, this is a final request. Provide the documents we have listed, or we will not complete this withdrawal today. The words clicked into place like a bolt. A hush followed, the kind that makes a clock sound louder. Danielle's face changed very little, but the little it changed mattered. The mouth's corners softened less, the eyes cooled a degree, and the spine found another inch. You have what you need to proceed, she said. If you intend to treat me as you treat your other customers. Brian drew breath as if to reply on behalf of the bank, and his breath whistled slightly, the way breath does when a person has been speaking more than listening. Linda tapped the clipboard against the tray, a small metronome of insistence. Richard held very still. Marcus' jaw set, not belligerent, only resolved, as if preparing to stand the way one stands when standing is the only tool a person has. Outside, a bus sighed at the curb and pulled away, and its reflection climbed the stone columns like a gray wave. Inside, the room held its sea. Emily's watch vibrated against her wrist, a flood of messages she did not check, because the only thing that mattered was fixed in the small rectangle of her phone. One woman, one window, one set of rules that seemed to change their shape the moment they met her. The young professionals by the rope were no longer pretending to go anywhere else. The gray-haired couple had stopped whispering. The man in the fleece vest had no more advice. In a corner chair, a mother adjusted a baby's blanket and then lifted her head, steady and attentive. Because children learn from rooms as much as from adults, and she wanted this room to teach the right lesson. Richard spoke again, softer, as if soft could be fair. If you return with the materials, we will happily assist you, he said, but we cannot proceed today. That was the break point, the moment that determines which story a place will tell about itself. Danielle did not raise her voice or search for a phrase that might trend. She looked at the faces beyond the glass, then down at the tray where her identification waited, then at the leather folio whose edges showed the useful wear of days spent in work. Without hurry and without drama, she drew the folio closer, set it square on the counter, and with the care one might use opening a family Bible, she unfastened it and began to lift the cover. Danielle placed the leather bag on the counter, slowly opening it. All eyes were on her. The leather cover parted on a quiet hinge, and the air in the lobby seemed to lean forward as if it too wished to see. Danielle did not hurry. She lifted a slim stack from an inner pocket where documents rest that are meant to be shown only when the time is right. The first item was a business card, soft white stock with a restrained watermark. The kind of card that looks plain until light finds it and the ink answers with a quiet gleam. She set it on the tray in front of the glass, centered, face up, as though arranging a place setting. The card read, in letters large enough that even those a few steps back could make them out, Danielle Harris, Chair and Chief Executive Officer, Harris Capital Group. Brian had the reflex to smirk, then found that his mouth had forgotten how. He reached for the card and then, perhaps remembering the lens of the phone trained on his hand, thought better of it. His fingers hovered, turned faintly at the tips, and withdrew. Linda's clipboard lowered a fraction without her permission. Richard, who a moment earlier had sounded like a man reciting policy, fell silent in the way people do when a page they thought they knew contains a paragraph they have never seen. Danielle set a second card beside the first, this one edged in the deep blue of corporate stationery. The logo in the corner needed no introduction. The line beneath it read, in small but lucid type, shareholder representative, board authorization on file. One step below the line, a clause in clear language stated that Harris Capital Group held a controlling interest in the Midwest operating division and maintained the largest single voting position. The percentage was spelled out the way lawyers spell numbers. The words were not loud, but they made a sound in the room all the same, the sound of weight settling. It was 1:15 in the afternoon. The clock announced it in its usual way, but the moment made the hands feel ceremonial, as if they, too, had reached something. Danielle's voice met that hour without flourishing. My name is printed there, she said. Harris Capital holds 29% of this division. We are the largest shareholder. The consonants were unhurried, the vowels held long enough that anyone listening could follow without replaying the sentence in their head. Emily did not zoom in. She let the frame hold the card, the faces, the small tremor of the second card's blue edge, where a breath had made it quake and then settle. In the corner of the stream, the count moved beyond thousands and into tens of thousands, written out in full words because clarity is a courtesy. Comments that had been careful now became plain. A chorus of elders, workers, parents, and neighbors stitching the same thought with different thread. A retired banker typed that nothing focuses a branch like a shareholder. A grandmother in a church hat wrote that dignity had just taken a chair at the counter. A veteran wrote that respect is not a favor. Marcus, who had read more situations than books, understood before his mind finished the line. He had seen this kind of turn. Not the card itself. He had never seen this exact card, but the turn where truth accepts the microphone. His stance softened by a degree that was only a degree to those who did not understand posture. To those who did, it was a pledge. Linda cleared her throat. Miss Harris, she began, and caught herself, because the name spoken properly will not let itself be swallowed. Miss Harris, she repeated. If there has been a misunderstanding, we can. Misunderstanding is the kinder word, Danielle said, not unkindly. She moved one page from the folio into the light. It was a formal memorandum with a date spelled out, an agenda for a quarterly review that listed an item titled Customer Experience Assessment. She did not thrust it at the glass. She placed it as she had placed the card, as if setting a fact down on a table where adults were speaking. This branch is part of a routine assessment, she said. Today's interaction will be part of that report. Brian glanced toward the lobby as if searching for a door that was not there, then back to the card as if the words might have changed when he looked away. His voice, when it came, had lost its surplus. We require consistency, he said, and the sentence, so strong a minute earlier, sounded thin beside the card's ink. We were following procedure. Then consistency will be a comfort to you, Danielle answered, because it will keep you company when we review how the procedure is applied. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The simple act of speaking plainly felt like a light turned on and left on. Richard reached for the file he had set on the counter and missed. It tipped with the inevitability that belongs to small mistakes in large moments. The paper slipped, fanned, and landed against the marble with a sound that made several people flinch as if the floor had dropped an inch. He bent to gather them. Emily kept the frame steady because that is what steadiness is for. In the stream comments, a phrase began to repeat. Not a slogan, exactly. More like a shared sentence. The owner has entered the story. A pastor typed that accountability comes gently until it does not. A nurse wrote that she had been listening from the break room and that the room had gone silent for the length of a prayer. Someone else typed that the story would be on the evening news, spelled out without abbreviations, and a link to a local station asked for permission to air. Emily, who had started with a simple caption and a steady hand, added one more line. Footage is public. Accuracy matters. A woman near the rope who had defended caution earlier put a hand over her mouth in a gesture that was not dramatic, only human. She dropped her hand, straightened, and spoke to the glass without looking at the phones. Ma'am, she said to Danielle, I'm sorry. The words were everyday words, but they changed the air the way a window open does. Linda steadied her clipboard. We will, of course, honor all policies, she said, her tone now made of marble. In accordance with any instructions from corporate, policies should not search for the nearest ladder when the light switch is at hand, Danielle said. She drew another paper from the folio, a brief internal summary that named locations in Chicago and beyond, a mapping of customer treatment metrics across neighborhoods. It did not accuse. It read. Numbers written in words, trends describing sentences. There's a way to talk about inequity that does not make the listener feel trapped. It simply removes the exits from the argument. Emily allowed the microphone to pick up the scratch of Linda's pen, the soft rush of paper against paper as Richard stacked his documents, the quiet breath Brian took before he returned the bank card, 2 inches at a time, across the tray. He did not look up. His hand, which had been so deliberate in its performance, seemed older by a year. "Thank you," Danielle said, taking the card back as if accepting a truce she had not requested. Marcus' radio hissed a small sentence from no one in particular, the kind of background whisper that means someone upstairs has been told that downstairs has become upstairs. He touched the button on his shoulder and muted it. When rooms change, a person chooses what they will be inside that change. His choice put weight on his heels. Brian found words that belonged to earlier in the day and tried to bring them into this minute. "Cash availability," he offered, as if handing an umbrella into a storm already past the point of umbrellas. "We may not release what you have," Danielle said. "Arrange the remainder. You have had ample time to verify identity and balance. You have mine. Now I will have yours." She did not smile. Neither did she scold. She made the sentence tan and plain and perfectly fitted to the work at hand. At the back of the lobby, the man in the navy suit spoke without leaving his place in line. "I have been a customer here for decades," he said. "If anyone asks me whether policy is consistent, I will answer according to what I saw today." No one shushed him. The bank is a place where money changes hands, but today it was also a place where testimony did. Emily's stream showed a rising sea of simple acknowledgments. People typed, "Thank you the way you do," when someone had said what needed to be said and said it properly. A small business owner wrote that he had printed policies to avoid uneven treatment and that the bank might consider doing the same. A grandmother wrote that she hoped the branch would remember this day the way families remember baptisms and weddings, a turning that makes other days make sense. One of the tellers at a neighboring window, a woman who had been balancing patience with the transactions in front of her, lifted her eyes and met Danielle's through the glass. She did not speak. She gave the nod of a worker who knows when a room's temperature has changed, and is glad of it. Danielle turned the folio so that the embossed initials faced her, and for a beat the room simply watched the steady shape of it. "This visit was not an ambush," she said. "It was a measure. You have helped define what needs to be repaired." The last word landed gently and then stood on its own 2 feet. Repair is a word elders trust. It does not promise miracles. It promises work. Richard had gathered his papers into a neat stack. "We will, of course, cooperate fully with any review," he said, finding a tone that had exchanged some of its polish for sincerity. "I regret that you experienced anything other than courtesy due to any customer." "Regret has value when it funds change," Danielle replied. Emily's lens held the space between those 2 sentences, the way a choir holds the breath before the final chord. The stream ticked onward into numbers that might fill a stadium, and the comments that mattered most were short and full. "Well said, thank you, watching, listening." A city was teaching itself, one line at a time. The bank's background music, which had gone soft during the hour's turn, returned at a slightly higher volume, as if someone in the back had adjusted the dial to give the room a scaffold on which to rest. People set their phones a fraction lower. A toddler in a stroller kicked 1 foot in time to nothing at all. A man at the far end of the line took off his hat. Light shifted on the marble. The folio closed. Danielle did not move away from the counter. Neither did the room move away from her. It held like that, a tableau made of ordinary people and ordinary furniture, and a fact that was not ordinary at all. Then a motor somewhere hidden in the wall announced itself with a soft hum, and a pair of doors at the far end of the lobby parted with a clean sound that always makes people turn. The elevator doors opened. Robert Whitman, the regional president, stepped in with a grave expression. Robert Whitman took in the room the way a man reads a ledger line by line, then set his briefcase on the counter's edge, not quite touching the glass, and spoke in a voice trained to calm markets and managers alike. He did not begin with rank or policy. He began with the human shape of the moment, acknowledging that the last hour had not met the standard any customer deserved. He addressed Danielle by name, not title, and apologized in sentences that did not lean on the word regret as a shield. The lobby absorbed this new tone with a careful relief, the way a congregation lets its shoulders down when the hymn finally finds the right key. Danielle listened without interrupting, her chin level, her hand resting on the folio as if it were a compass she had already checked and would check again. When Robert finished, she thanked him for the courtesy of plain speech and then, with the same steadiness, set out what would come next. She did not raise a banner. She raised a standard. The room learned its name in a single sentence, Harris Standards. She explained that the work was not about punishment first, but about repair that lasts. The first measure would be training that touched every customer-facing employee. Not a single afternoon of slides and signatures, but 40 hours of instruction in bias awareness, de-escalation, and the equal application of policy, with a requirement to renew that learning every year. The second measure would bring a listening device to the bank's own language, a system that reviews customer interactions in real time, not to spy, but to surface early warning signs of uneven treatment so that supervisors could intervene before dignity is damaged. The third measure would install an independent civil rights ombudsman, someone outside the chain of branch command, reporting directly to the board, with authority to investigate complaints and to order changes when the pattern, not just the episode, required it. The fourth measure would be transparency that the public could trust. A quarterly report written in words as well as numbers, showing how the bank was doing on equal treatment across neighborhoods. The fifth measure would invest outward, a fund dedicated to small businesses in communities that had too often been told to wait, with simple applications and human help in filling them out. She spoke the way elders teach, unafraid of complete sentences. She did not drum her fingers for emphasis or point across the glass. She let each point land and sit. Emily's dream, which had already climbed into the realm of stadium crowds, passed the mark of more than 50,000 people watching, and the common lines began to sound like a national meeting held in living rooms, lunch counters, and break rooms. A retired branch manager typed that training only sticks when executives take the class, too. A pastor wrote that accountability without humiliation is a kind of grace. A nurse wrote that real-time help is the difference between saving and losing a life, and that maybe a bank could learn a lesson from a trauma ward. In the corner of the frame, Marcus stood a half step behind Danielle's shoulder line, close enough to signal where his judgment had come to rest, far enough to let the conversation breathe. Robert listened like a man who understood that a door had swung and he was on his hinge. He asked questions, not to stall but to understand the workmanship of the plan, who would teach the courses, how appeals would work, how the monitoring would guard against misuse, how the ombudsman would be shielded from influence. Danielle answered without reaching for memorized phrases. The instructors would include lawyers who knew the law by practice, not only by page, community leaders who had the trust of people who did not like banks, and veterans of customer service who had learned to diffuse heat without cooling the heart. Appeals would be organized by timelines, measured in days, not months. The monitoring would protect privacy by analyzing patterns rather than recording names, and it would send a quiet alert like a seatbelt chime that asked a supervisor to step close and listen. The ombudsman would be contracted with terms that could not be softened by friendship or pressure, and the office would publish every resolution in plain language. Linda Morales and Brian Collins stood in the posture that no training teaches, the posture of people understanding that a chapter is closing with their names in it. Their faces had lost the confidence they had mistaken for competence. Yet Danielle did not turn the moment into a public shaming. She kept every sentence pointed at the door that leads to repair, even while making clear that repair requires tools, and tools cost money, and money is a language boards understand. She said the board would review personnel decisions as a separate matter, and the room knew what that meant without having it spelled out. She said the standards would be implemented on a schedule measured in weeks for the first steps and in months for the system build. And in that choice of units, the lobby heard certainty. Not someday, not later, but soon. A ripple passed through the crowd, not applause, because this was still a bank lobby, and no one wanted to be the first to clap, but the sound of people exhaling at the same time. The gray-haired couple who had moved between trust and doubt found themselves firm again. The young professionals by the rope let their hands fall from their phones and simply watched. The man in the navy suit nodded once, a slow assent from a customer who has spent decades wearing good shoes on marble floors. The mother in the stroller stroked her child's sleeve and whispered something soft that only a child needs to hear at such a moment. Emily's phone captured the details that make a story feel true, the way Robert's shoulders lowered by 1 inch as the plan gathered shape, the way Marcus' jaw unclenched when accountability was written as action, the way Danielle's hand rested open on the folio, fingers quiet after a week of making fists at things that needed changing. The stream's comments shifted from outrage to logistics, a sign that people had begun to believe in the possibility of work. A small business owner in Brownsville asked whether the fund would include workshops on bookkeeping. A grandmother asked whether the bank would send someone to her church to explain the new policies. A high school teacher wrote that he wanted his civics class to hear the recording. Robert described the road between this moment and the boardroom decision. He said he would brief the executive committee before the end of the day, convene regional leadership on a call the next morning, and schedule a special session to vote on the package. He did not promise a unanimous result. He promised to carry the plan with his own voice, and his voice was the tool he owned. He also asked directly, in the tone of a man prepared to say yes, whether there was any space to shape the timelines around staffing seasons and the end-of-year budget cycle. Danielle offered accommodation without surrender. The first training would begin within 60 days, and the ombudsman's office would open within the same window. The monitoring system would begin with a pilot in Chicago branches and expand across the division within 2 quarters. Quarterly transparency reports would start with the very next quarter, even if the first report acknowledged rough edges. The community fund would open applications within 60 days, with a simple form that could be completed at a branch with human help, and the first awards would be granted before the spring thaw. She translated every number into words, not as a flourish for the microphones, but as a promise to the people listening on radios and older phones that stumble over numerals. In that accounting, the plan felt less like a press release and more like a calendar someone could tape to a refrigerator. The older gentleman in the tweed cap smiled at that thought and said, quietly, "Now you have given us dates we can hold you to." Danielle inclined her head and accepted those words the way a builder accepts a level placed on a beam. Brian drew a breath to speak, then let it go. The best thing he could do in that moment was to learn the posture of someone else's listening. Linda looked down at her clipboard and wrote her own name on a corner of the paper, not because it needed writing there, but because that is what people sometimes do when they need to see their name in a place where they're not sure it belongs anymore. Emily's stream doubled again, not because of spectacle, but because word of a plan spreads faster than word of a problem when people trust the voice that carries it. In living rooms where elders keep the television on low, in diners where the coffee is poured freely and tips are left in careful bills, in offices where a manager paused the meeting to watch for a minute that became 10, the plan found its way. A radio station in the loop asked for a summary they could read on air. A community foundation posted that they were ready to match the fund with grants of their own. A retired judge wrote that he would attend the first public forum as a citizen, not as a robe. Robert spoke again, this time with the cadence of a man who had set down a burden he had not even known he was carrying. He said the bank would accept the training, the reporting, and the independent review. He asked a final question about the monitoring system, and Danielle clarified once more that it will listen for patterns, not pry into private lives, and that it will be used to coach ahead of correction. She concluded with a sentence that deserves to be read more than once. The goal is not to catch people. The goal is to keep them from falling. A sound rose, then a human sound, not a corporate one. It was the murmur that rooms make when they recognize a just thing. It did not crest into cheers, because this was not a stadium and the work had only begun. But it rested on the air like a hymn's last note. Robert studied Danielle for a long beat, then opened his mouth to step across the line from apology to acceptance. He drew in a breath, and the lobby waited as if the hour itself were holding a pen over a signature line. Robert nodded, but his eyes were still troubled. If we refuse, then what? A week later, the ballroom in Washington, the one with high ceilings and rows of flags stitched by careful hands, filled with a steady rustle of programs and a low tide of voices that sounded like a city breathing. The National Financial Equality Conference had a way of turning strangers into a congregation. Name badges pinned neatly, coffee poured from steel urns into paper cups, a trio of union musicians testing a gentle chord before the session began. Back by the doors, hotel staff moved with the offstage grace that keeps rooms comfortable, and a tip jar on the kiosk already held a few folded singles from early risers who understood the art of service. Emily Parker, camera slung and pressed ribbon tucked under her blazer, took a seat along the center aisle where her lens could see without blocking anyone's view. Marcus Johnson, in a navy suit that fit like work, checked his watch and then the run of seats saved for guests of the first panel. He no longer wore a guard's badge. The new badge read Director of Compliance, a phrase that, in his hands, had come to mean neighbor as much as rule. In the second row, Robert Whitman sat with his shoulders square and his jaw set in a practiced calm. He had not slept easily since the afternoon in Chicago, and he did not come to be seen. He came to listen, the lights softened by a degree, and the stage filled with a quiet expectancy. Danielle Harris walked to the lectern with the practiced economy of someone who has earned every room she enters. She did not sweep to the center or lean in to claim space. She let the room offer it. On the screen behind her, a single line reads simply, National Financial Equality Conference, Washington, District of Columbia. No slogans, no drum roll. She offered thanks to the organizers, to the workers who had set up chairs and microphones, to the interpreters along the sidewall, to those watching from community centers and church halls. She greeted elders with the respect owed to people who have seen decades speak in full sentences. Then, with a steady breath, she returned to the hinge on which the whole story had turned. A question sat down in Chicago by a regional president who found himself standing on the wrong side of a door. If we refuse, then what? The answer, she told them, had been made plain. The bank did not refuse. It accepted the standard and chose repair over pride. She did not retell the hour in the lobby as a spectacle. She retold it as a lesson learned aloud. She described what had been agreed and what had begun. The first training, 40 hours, written in words rather than a cluster of numerals, will start within 60 days and will return each year. Executives would attend, not as observers, but as students, with folders and pens. The independent civil rights ombudsman had been contracted with terms that could not be softened by friendship, and the office had opened with a direct line that someone actually answered. The real-time monitoring, designed to listen for patterns instead of pry into private lives, had deployed in a pilot across Chicago branches and would expand across the Midwest within 2 quarters. Transparency reports would arrive each quarter, written in plain language, not as an apology but as an accounting. And the community fund, seeded with dollars that had once been thought of as marketing spend, had opened with a simple form that could be completed at a branch with human help. The first awards would be granted before the spring thaw. She paused and let the details sit long enough for people to picture a calendar on the refrigerator. She spoke of outcomes as a citizen would, cautious about premature celebration yet unafraid of honest praise. Early data, gathered carefully and read aloud in sentences, showed complaint volumes related to unequal treatment falling by nearly half at pilot locations. Customer satisfaction in neighborhoods long taught to brace themselves had risen in a way that did not feel like a poll but like a sigh of relief at a counter. Branch managers reported that the first effect of training was not vocabulary but posture. Shoulders lowered, eyes lifted, the muscles of the face learning to tell the truth before the mouth did. A grandmother in Anacostia had called a branch to ask for a copy of the new policy because she wanted to tape it to a church bulletin board. A small shop owner on the west side had asked the fund for help with a bookkeeping class, and the bank had sent not just a check but a person with patience to teach and a stack of pencils sharpened to easy points. The changes were specific enough to feel real. She gave thanks by name to those who had helped turn the wheel. She named tellers who had chosen courtesy under pressure, supervisors who had stepped in on a quiet Tuesday afternoon and set something right without waiting for a memo, elders who had written letters in longhand because typed words felt too thin for the weight they carried. She did not spare the institution the weight of its failure. She told the truth about how policy had flags where it should not have flags and how that flags had bent dignity. She told the truth about how the room in Chicago had taught an entire network of rooms to listen before they explained. Through it all, she kept her voice at a human pitch, the way radio does when it is read for people who are cooking supper or paying bills at the kitchen table. She did not ask the audience to be impressed. She asked them to be present. Emily photographed not the gestures that shout, but the small ones that reveal. Robert's hand, still for a long stretch, rose to write a note. He did not write a defense. He wrote an intention. Marcus sat with the slight lean of a man ready to stand if needed, which is how he stands even when no one is watching. Along the side wall, an interpreter moved with the grace of someone who understands that meaning is carried by breath as much as by words. The musicians at the back set their instruments aside and listened with the stillness artists give to the afternoons that might become songs. The story turned toward the future without making the past a prop. Danielle laid out what the coming months would require. Budgeting that treated fairness like a core system, not a software add-on. Hiring that measured not just resume lines, but the muscles of patience and clarity. Community meetings where reports would be presented and questions would be answered until the elders were satisfied. She invited those present to hold the bank to each promise and to call the office when patience became an excuse rather than a virtue. She described a schedule of public forums across the Midwest, listed by city with dates spelled the way calendars spell them, and asked local leaders to volunteer a room where neighbors could sit in folding chairs and say what needed to be said into microphones that worked. When it was time to cross from steel to light, she did not pound the lectern. She told a simple story about a Sunday school teacher who once said that repair is heavier than breaking and that the only people who carry heavy things well are people who carry them together. She looked up, not down, and let her eyes find the faces of elders and apprentices and bank tellers and executives and people who had come on their lunch break, still carrying the smell of coffee and the stain of toner on the fingertip. She set down the sentence that has the right to be spoken only by those willing to live in it. When the truth is brought to light, justice will never be denied. The sound that answered her was not noise. It was recognition. People rose in waves that had little to do with choreography. The applause began as hands speaking and became a room testifying. Emily lowered her camera for a beat to let her own hands join, then lifted it again because witness is also a kind of work. Robert stood with the rest. Applause measured and sincere, the kind given by a man who intends to keep his promise. Marcus clapped in a rhythm as old as the pews where he had learned to clap as a boy, eyes bright and steady. A woman in a bright scarf wiped one cheek and laughed at herself for it. The union trio at the back did not play. They stood, too. When the room returned to stillness, Danielle closed by naming the neighbors to whom the work belonged next. The branch manager in South Shore, who would hold the first forum, the deacon at a church in Ward 8, who had offered a hall and a pot of stew, the school principal, who had asked for a lesson plan about policy and dignity. She thanked the conference for making a national conversation feel like a neighborhood one, and for making a neighborhood conversation feel worthy of the nation. She offered a quiet benediction for workers whose jobs require both ledger and heart. And then she stepped away from the lectern without a flourish. Emily's final photographs caught hands reaching for hands, staff setting microphones back into crates, a volunteer placing programs into a recycling bin with care. Somewhere near the back, a radio reporter rehearsed the line she would read on air, tasting the words to make sure they would land right on a winter evening in kitchens and cars. The big screen behind the stage brightened as the conference feed rolled to a closing slate, and people began to file toward the doors where the hotel staff had set out more coffee and small plates of cookies. The screen held one last shot, live from the hall, a wide view that took in flags and chairs and faces, carrying the quiet of work to be done. Then the graphic changed. Not loud, just clear. On the big screen, the hashtag number Harris Standards begins to spread across the nation, opening a new era in American finance. In the quiet, after the applause had faded, what lingered was not the noise of a crowded hall, but the memory of a single woman who chose to stand firm with dignity. Her calm insistence turned a moment of humiliation into a seed of reform, reminding everyone that fairness is not a luxury, but a duty we owe one another. The lesson is simple and yet enduring. When love, accountability, and truth walk side by side, even long-held prejudice can give way to change. Much like an old porch light guiding neighbors home at dusk, the steady glow of justice can show us the path through our most uncertain nights. If this story stirs something in you, let it be a reason to extend kindness nearby. For in sharing warmth, we continue the work of building a more generous community.